Shane Kilkelly.
And I'm Kyle Thompson.
And you're listening to General Intellect Unit. And this time we are talking to our friends from Common Knowledge, a workers' co-op that works on technical infrastructure for social movements. It's a fun little interview. I love this sort of thing of like people doing the thing that, like, I mean, I'm sure it's not like directly inspired by what we've been rabbiting on about, but like taking the same impulse of like, hey, we should really get fucking serious about organizing and the infrastructure of organizing, and then going and doing it and then getting to hear back from them, which is really wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for being on the show.
Yeah, it's on to the interview. Well, it's great to have you here. We're here speaking with Gemma and Alex from Common Knowledge. Let's see. Gemma, who are you? What are you doing here? Why are these things happening?
Hi, I'm Gemma Copeland. I'm 1/5 of Common Knowledge. I work at co-op. I have a background in originally graphic design, but then kind of UI, UX design. So I do that within the co-op along with a bunch of other stuff, I guess.
Pretty cool. And Alex?
Yeah, so I'm Alex Warrad-Andrews. I'm also 1/5 of Common Knowledge. And I guess, like, professionally, I'm a software engineer, but I do a lot of the kind of project and kind of like internal organization stuff in Common Knowledge when we know we have to like deliver software. And that I have a background in continental philosophy, and yeah, I'm very excited to be here today.
Yeah, we're all very excited, and the good kind of philosophy, I might add.
Analytic philosophy has its place. I will defend some aspects of it.
It's places below continental, though. Anyway, so what's Common Knowledge all about? What's the deal there?
So we are a worker cooperative, which means that every one of our members like owns and controls the collective. We're a not-for-profit, which means that like any kind of surplus we make from doing consultancy work, we kind of redistribute either to the co-op or doing solidarity work for organizations. And we design and build digital technology for activist groups, community organizers, unions, charities, etc. At the start, we kind of were always saying like design and build digital tools for activists, but we are kind of, I guess, expanding our definition of what activism is. But I guess what we're really interested in is this kind of like bottom-up organizing, so really about kind of like empowering people to make change in their own lives, and less so about kind of electoral politics.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. So I guess, was there any particular like reason or like set of events that kind of led to the realization of, hey, we need to go and do tech infrastructure for social movements?
So Common Knowledge was kind of founded out of basically an analysis of the fact that in kind of political technology in general, and political technology, I mean like, you know, things like pieces of technology that allow people to build their collective power, their collective capacity, their ability to act, their ability to influence events, was, you know, largely produced in a kind of electoral context. So, you know, if you look at the current US electoral cycle, there will be a whole bunch of technology that has been built out the back of that. Some of it will be, you know, turned into what you call in software engineering commodity technology. That means that technology that, like, you know, anyone can buy off the shelf and then use it for, you know, propagating their own campaigns. And one of the observations that led to the foundation of Common Knowledge is in terms of non-electoral technology, technology that was to do with organizing, organizing people, where that is in, grassroots trade unions, whether that is in, community organizing groups, whether that is in kind of like activist contexts, that was kind of lacking any kind of like technology. People have made various attempts to do this kind of stuff, but that was kind of lacking. And also there was no kind of institution. There was kind of no institution to kind of bind together these efforts over time. So that was like one of the things that led to the founding of Common Knowledge. But one of the other things that led to it is that the reason why it's called Common Knowledge is that we felt that the kind of techniques of both organizing itself, so like, the act of like how to organize collectives, how to, organize campaigns for social change, was kind of like a little bit difficult to get hold of those understandings. And the digital aspect of this, so how to do this in terms of software and using software for this kind of thing, like how to structure a campaign, but organizing data for a campaign, web tools for a campaign, was also very obscure. So in a way, what we're trying to do is do two things. We're trying on one hand to build the tools, hopefully, that are useful for organizers, and on the second level, show how we have built the tools and encourage others to do likewise.
So would it be, if I'm understanding correctly, like the existing sort of technical solutions would all be geared towards an electoral sort of framework that would assume that like the tasks you're going to be doing are like gathering emails for a newsletter and like organizing like door knocking basically, and that those would also, like the institutional forms necessary to do organizing would also still be kind of like fairly obscured. Like even if you went and got that software, it's like you're not going to know how to run a sort of run a grassroots campaign anyway, and that I maybe this kind of gels with my experience that like when people end up putting together like mutual aid networks or any kind of grassroots campaigns, they just end up using like Slack or Discord or something, which is like totally unstructured. So you have a choice between like this structured thing that doesn't do what you need it to do, and also the thing that it does is something you don't have institutional knowledge of anyway, versus free text, free for all, like IRC on steroids, right? Is that a fair way of framing it?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. It's kind of, so one of the things that we talk about is like the affordances of the digital technology. So it's like, if something's built in electoral context, and especially a lot of the tools that are out there are built in like a US context as well. So then they kind of have like baked into the system this kind of like top-down method of organizing. And then also, like you say, like it's maybe more about lobbying. And then, yeah, you're right that like the alternative is that people use off-the-shelf tools and kind of like retrofit it to their purposes and kind of string things together. And yeah, often they are these kind of just like a stream of chats, which is very kind of stressful and hard to actually kind of manage a lot of the time.
Right. You have like on the one hand, you have a software that has like hard-coded strings that say, call your senator. Or on the other hand, you have no structure whatsoever. You have to figure it all out.
Yeah, totally. That seems to be the way it kind of proceeds. And like, so in a sense, that kind of latter thing where you use kind of, as I said before, like commodity software. So, Google Docs, Google Sheets, WhatsApp is very common in the UK for people doing organizing. You use, and you kind of string this stuff together. You kind of string it together. Zapier, I never remember how to pronounce that. Zapier. Zapier is a common piece of software that people use to kind of like string this kind of stuff together to kind of have a coherent kind of like data stream of stuff. But that kind of like set of like suite of like techniques where you kind of use this commercially available software to kind of organize campaigns, like has a name, and that name is originally it was kind of called big organizing, There was a book by Becky Bond and Zach, I can't remember the last name, that was written about this, which is called Rules for Revolutionaries. And this is about how to organize a campaign at scale, in their particular case, the Bernie Sanders campaign, using, these kind of technologies. And yeah, as Gemma says, there's this tension between, using the technologies that exist that aren't fit for this particular purpose. So using something like Google Sheets, which is, a generic spreadsheet product that is online and is shareable and so on and so forth, that allows you to kind of twist that in a way to use it in a kind of organizing context, and using bespoke tools, which currently, in the most part, are not, as we said, generally fitted towards the American context. Things like MPG Van, also, things like Nation Builder, so on and so forth. They're kind of fitted to a US context, and not only just a US context geographically, but a electoral context specifically. Either electoral on one side, I guess, or basically lobbying is the other thing, advocacy as opposed to organizing.
Yeah, it's almost like a lot of the stuff we've been talking about on the show, right? Of the sort of mutual fit between technology and institutions and social usage of the technology and such. I guess a sort of thing we're quite interested in is like the experience of like setting up a kind of workers co-op and stuff. And I guess, did any of you have experience with workers co-ops before, or was there anything kind of interesting about the process, or any particular obstacles that you encountered, or maybe was it just a kind of boring slog to get the paperwork together?
It was basically a boring slog to get the paperwork together. There's something about society that doesn't make founding a workers' co-op very easy.
What a surprise.
But yeah, so I mean, to speak to your first question, which is like, did any of us have any background in cooperatives? Like I have in the past worked for a cooperative which is called Outlandish, which is a UK-based cooperative that is also like a tech cooperative, and that's like maybe something we can talk about a little bit later, which is in the UK there's a kind of a network of tech cooperatives called CoTech. At the founding meeting of CoTech, I argued very hard for it not to be called CoTech, because I thought it was a terrible name. But I lost that argument. I wanted to because it was kind of inspired, and I know that you've had these folks on the podcast. It was kind of inspired by the Enspiral network to some degree, that Lumio is part of, and a variety of other co-ops out of New Zealand. And so there's a similar network in the UK that's called CoTech. And I had previously worked with Outlandish, who are, as I said, a tech cooperative. And so I had some experience of both being in a cooperative prior to working at Common Knowledge or founding Common Knowledge. So I kind of knew some of the things that some of the kind of internal infrastructure that one would require, which is, for example, using a particular decision-making technique that we use in Common Knowledge and a few other tech co-ops use called Sociocracy. But in terms of actually bootstrapping and starting one, I didn't really have a vast amount of experience. We were very lucky because we're part of this network. We kind of knew some people who would be supportive. So there is a kind of a co-op that is, I guess, provides advice called Principle 6, who are run by a guy called Sean, and so he kind of guided us through the process. So that process looked like trying
to say he's kind of like the this kind of figure in the co-op movement who guides every co-op through this process. He's quite amazing, and really on call. I've emailed him before being like, I have this question, and he's literally called me up and be like, here's what you should do.
I mean, He is from he is a member of Calvert's, who are a print cooperative, print co-op in London, and they've been doing this since I think maybe the late 70s to early 80s. So they are very experienced in this kind of world.
He's also part of Co-ops UK and like part of the Hive, which is kind of like the incubator for co-ops. So yeah, it's like I think that these kind of things that exist for setting up a co-op do make the kind of bureaucratic side of it slightly more easy, like that you can hook into this kind of network. Although I do have a different experience because I didn't found the co-op, I joined it. So I guess I got to skip some of the boring stuff.
I mean, it wasn't that it was boring or particularly difficult. It's just that there is like, it's good to have someone guide you through the process, because like the first couple of questions that'll be asked are, because obviously like a co-op is, as well as being like in our particular case something that like wants to create like social change, produce software that does that, is also like, you know, a business to some degree. And you know, the kind of questions that he would lead us through are, you know, what kind of work do you want to do, like, and therefore what is the institution on the legal form that is appropriate to that work.
Yeah. That was actually what, like, my kind of reaction when you asked that question was kind of, I think a lot of the obstacles or like learnings are basically like around setting up a business rather than setting up a co-op. I think the co-op part of it is almost easier because it's really about these kind of like, you know, these are the principles, these are the values, and it's stuff that really like resonates on many different levels and like a political thing, and you have all these other people to kind of talk about. But then a lot of the time, like at the end of the day, where like the way that we're set up is as like a wait, what is it? I can't remember the actual legal structure.
So the legal structure of common knowledge and like is quite a simple legal structure to go for if in certainly under UK law that you want to form a cooperative, is a company limited by guarantee without share capital. Yeah. This is a common legal structure that's also used for organizations, for example, NEON, New Economics, New Economy Organizers Network, shout out to them. Yeah, so, you know, it's a common thing for kind of think tanks, other social good infrastructure, so on and so forth, to form under this particular rubric, because it means that no one can like, you don't have shares, so no one can like own you or buy you out and so on and so forth. And in particular, so we have that, but then what makes us a co-op is that we have our kind of articles, our kind of like legal articles have cooperative rules. And unfortunately, like the process in order to like have a company limited by guarantee with cooperative rules in UK law is it requires filling in a paper form, and there was a whole debacle in the early days where we filled it in slightly wrong, and then there was a back and forth and all the rest of it. But yeah, as Gemma says, it wasn't onerous, but it was, you know, it took a little while to set up.
I think the main thing, is like the challenges are around you're trying to learn how to run a business and set up a business, but a lot of the time maybe what you're doing is not kind of suited to like the context of late capitalism. And so then there's like extra things along the way that are difficult because nothing's kind of been, the bureaucracy or whatever, it doesn't allow, or it makes it harder if you're kind of like, oh, there's no one person who has significant control of the organization. Like that's been a problem for us. And I think that there's also like the other kind of behind the scenes stuff that you have to learn. So like, like what would be, I guess, termed like HR in normal terms, like members, like how you deal with holidays or mental health, how you deal with finances. And so you're trying to work out that kind of stuff, but also how do we do this in like a non-hierarchical, democratic, sometimes radical way. And so it just kind of adds like an extra challenge in that way. But I think like a good challenge, and it's super interesting as well.
Yeah, absolutely. But I guess the upside is that it can be done, which I think is our listeners will find to be very, very reassuring.
Yeah, it definitely can be done. It definitely can be done. And, you know,
it's easier than you think. Do it today.
Yeah, get involved, start. Like the only thing you need to do is start. And, as I always say, and I'm probably going to regret saying this on a podcast, but reach out to us. We can talk to you. Certainly we can give you some advice. We can give you some advice in the UK context.
Yeah,
absolutely. We'll certainly, we'll put your link prominently on the show notes.
Oh dear.
So just to provide a point of comparison, I previously set up a consultancy business, and the paperwork and process involved in that as a sole proprietorship was basically 2 days of work. It was go in, register the business with a name. So I just had to think about the name, register it, go to the bank, spend a day in the bank getting a business account. It's done. So just to provide that point of comparison to your comment about the difficulties of navigating late capitalism, the system is very much organized towards setting up sole proprietor businesses or registered businesses as capital is concerned.
I mean, I think, that's very true. And, if us in this podcast wanted to set up a company like in the UK right now, like we could just go online, we could set it up within like 15 minutes. Like, and that's maybe not even an exaggeration on some of the services that will do this for you. Setting up a co-op is going to be a little bit more involved, but it's not really that bad. The advice I would give is that don't attempt to set up don't imagine this is going to be like a kind of like a fortnight kind of situation. Imagine it's going to take you 3 months, because in terms of the technical operation, you're going to need stuff that any business would need, but in a cooperative business, it's like a little bit tougher. So you're going to need like a bank account. So for example, if you were minded to get a bank account with Monzo, or which is they have business accounts, or you're in the UK or one of these kind of like very quick like startup banks, like it's very like they basically don't allow it. Not because you're a co-op, but because if you are constituted in this particular way, company limited by guarantee, and you understand all these kind of like weird like kind of legal edge cases that So what I'm saying is that it's not hard, but it takes a little bit longer, and obviously like this for reasons that probably obvious to your listeners, this like disincentivizes people from going down this route to some extent. So like, some people might be like, oh, I don't know, like I want to like make cookies and I want to be ethical about it. And I don't know. And, they will often like just pick the company formation that is the kind of default, which is, just a company limited by share capital, like with a couple of people that are directors of that company, without having the cooperative rules and all the other stuff of this on top. And that's because it's easier. And I think one of the things that we try and advocate is that, particularly in our kind of space, is that when people come to us and they say, I want to drop out of my tech job, I hate it, like we're making the world a better place, which is genuinely something that people come to us and say relatively regularly. The first thing we say is like, if you're going to do this, obviously, some business models might not suit this. Some kind of things that people want to do might be better suited to be a charity or so on and so forth in terms of legal formation. What we say to them is, well, I think that considering your values and considering what you want to do, maybe a cooperative is right for you.
Yeah. And maybe also to kind of counter the like, oh, it's difficult part, is that I think, especially with like kind of tech companies, like ones that tend to be quite small and already working in like fairly collaborative ways, and doing something where like the main product, I guess, that you're selling is the output of your labor. Like this kind of stuff actually works really well as a worker co-op, and can so that there's actually good reasons for doing it that way. And then the second thing would be that you can also, just because you've set up a business and it's not a co-op doesn't mean that that's out forever. You can convert like I think Outlandish, for example, was originally not a co-op and became a co-op, and same with another couple in the CoTech network. So it's like it's possible like to just change your kind of company structure a little bit.
Yeah, I wonder to what extent, like, you know, as much as it's possible, legally speaking, to very quickly found a capitalist organization, obviously, if you're going to properly go into business, you're going to be formulating a business plan and doing all kinds of logistical labor prior to that moment. And so I wonder if it's mostly a question of like dovetailing those organizational concerns with the legal application, just knowing beforehand that it's going to take a little bit longer to do it with a co-op.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think that is definitely the case. And like, for example, for example, in the UK, the natural place to have a bank account for a cooperative that will kind of understand it and get it, that you're a co-op, and that like certain things that Gemma was talking about, like the fact that like all your members are directors, you know, you don't have persons of significant control, all these kind of like legal factors, is to go to the cooperative bank, the UK cooperative bank. Yeah, which is, you know, obvious. But the thing about them is, you know, they require a quite detailed business plan up front. So in answer to your question, like knowing that like the wheels are going to take a while, yeah, you should try and think about and try and develop that. I mean, without like becoming too tedious about. Obviously, Common Knowledge are an institution that is attempting to do something more widely than just be, you know, a business that like sells sprockets. Like we're not that. We're a non-profit. We're attempting to like provide technology for people that are, you know, organizers. But at the same time, like, you know, we have to think about how we're going to keep ourselves afloat. You know, so, you know, if you're thinking about, I would like, you know, if you're I don't know, an engineer or a designer or UX person, you're thinking, you know, what I want to escape this. I want to like get out of the mainstream tech industry and want to do something more worthwhile with my time, my finite time on Earth.
You're reading my mind here, you know?
Yeah, you know, I lost my thread of thought because I was thinking about my own mortality.
Just slipped into the black hole there for a moment. So were you trying to say basically that like if you do want to get out of the rat race and do something positive, maybe like you need to take it seriously, do the financial plan, and like get the belt and braces in place, and like it's boring but you have to do it. Is that it?
Yeah, you have to do it. So you need to think what is the, you know, we live under capitalism for the moment. We have to cope with, you know, wage labor. Co-ops have always been like this. Co-ops have always been, you know, a place of employment as well as a place of social change. So you need to work out what's the basic thing. What are you going to sell? And so on and so forth.
I think also like one thing that has worked to our advantage is we've always been really clear from the start of like, this is the specific thing we do. You know, kind of talking about tools for grassroots activism. And I think that clarity, not saying that everyone needs to be doing that exact thing, but like that clarity around this kind of mission, I think really helped us throughout. We also like right at the start, when we started on this, like completely full time, like quit our other jobs and everything. We spent, I think it was like 2 or 3 days, like in a room working out like, okay, what's our vision, mission and values, and, you know, doing many, many iterations. And like, I guess doing something like that forces everyone in the room or encourages everyone in the room to kind of articulate, why am I doing this? What do I care about? And then also like, we refer to these a lot. Like we even set them as like weekly intentions. And we use that to decide, should we work on this project as well? So I think like having that basis from the start, like as well as a business plan, like the kind of like ethical and like conceptual framework is really, really important.
Yeah. And it took us a long while to like thrash those out. But, you know, as Gemma says, like it allows us to orientate ourselves. So like, you know, our mission is working directly with grassroots activists. We design digital tools that make radical change possible. So like when, we're like approaching a collaboration with someone, that are some of the questions that we'll ask ourselves. Like, does this serve this mission, or is this tangential to that mission? And also
to remind ourselves, like, are we working directly with these people, or is it kind of like a level kind of removed? Like, we really try to be talking to people on the ground and talking to members and that kind of thing. So I think it having a kind of statement like that keeps us accountable as well.
Yeah, and I think I hope like accountable to like those outside the co-op, because like we're we want to be accountable to the social movements that we serve. In a way, there's an aspect of kind of like service to the work we do. We aren't. I feel that we aren't doing the work ourselves, right? We're activists of a certain kind, or like organizers of a certain kind, but we're not in a grassroots trade union. We're not on the ground being community organized. Yeah, you're in a grassroots trade union. Okay, fair enough. Yeah, there's a couple of people in common knowledge that are part of trade unions. I'm not actually. I feel bad. But yeah, so
it's more about making sure we're supporting these people.
Yeah, it's far more important to provide the infrastructure that allows people the freedom, the possibility to articulate their struggles or the social change that they want to see, than like for us to be in the foreground, I guess.
Yeah. So working with these social movements and such, like, are there any, like, do you find that there are recurring patterns of the kinds of problem that these movements have, that they run into, and that the kinds of problems you can solve for them or help them to solve, etc.?
I think a big, I don't know if it's problem, but like a big focus, or what we've been thinking about lately, is how you build relationships with your membership and how you kind of like engage them and everything. And like, I think, we talk about like different levels of organizing. There was a great report by Tectonica that came out a little while ago that kind of analyzes this. They kind of talk about broadcasting, mobilizing, and organizing. I mean, it's something that we were already talking about, but they made a really nice graphic as well and backed it up with loads of evidence. And I think that a lot of the really good organizers are trying to get more on the kind of organizing and like distributed organizing end of that, rather than just like sending out a newsletter, tweeting, like getting people to share something on Twitter. So yeah, I think that this is kind of one of the key things that we talk to people about.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's like super fundamental for common knowledge, is that we're building tools for organizing. So this kind of like division is. It should be said that this division doesn't mean that like mobilizing is never worthwhile, or mobilizing is never needed as part of a coherent campaign for social change. But this distinction between mobilizing and organizing is something internally and externally we talk about a lot. So it's a distinction between, people on one side just being like, people not really having autonomy within the campaign, people just like being told what to do, and organizing, which is where people concretely are building their own power and have the capacity to make change. So one is like quite passive and one is quite active. And I think that, as the top we were talking about the way that electoral campaigns like operate. Electoral campaigns often operate in a kind of the kind of mobilizing mode, although increasingly they are getting more into this organizing kind of mode. So that, in organizing, the people are like relationally powerful, they're empowered, they're in kind of like democratic with a small d, in a certain sense, control over the organizations that they work with, like London Renters Union, who we work with, which is both small d democratic, i.e. by small d democratic, I mean like there's an ethos of democracy, there's an ethos of participation and control, but they're also big D democratic, i.e. they have formal like elections to the board and various functions of the organization. So I think that's an important distinction for us. We're not interested particularly, although this is obviously a natural part of our work because it's often the door in to a more structured organizing campaign. We're not particularly about lobbying per se. We're not about, the classic, and of course they operate and they work like the kind of things that an organization like 38 Degrees might do, where, there's a form and there's like lobby your MP, like send them a petition, that kind of thing. Although it has its place and it's an important part of, as I say, a structured campaign for social change, we're more interested in providing or understanding how we might provide with others and understand how to build digital tools for more the organizing aspect. So more that, yeah, sorry.
Oh, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt. I was just going to kind of pick up on this. Like, I think what's interesting, so we try to work with a really broad range of kind of activist concerns, I guess. We're not focused on one particular thing. But amongst all these different groups, even if they have like quite different areas that they're working and maybe like structures or sizes or whatever, like often a common question is like, how can we encourage or train or empower like our members to become organizers themselves? So like this idea that it's not just, like passive membership, but, giving people the confidence and the power to organize. But there's obviously, that's much harder and much slower.
Mm-hmm. And we're not terribly good at doing it either. I mean, this organizing thing has been a fascination of ours for this entire length of the show. I like that you've drawn that distinction there between organizing versus mobilization. I kind of suspect that like our concepts of like mobilization really date from like the sort of great power politics and like the big state politics of the like 19th and 20th centuries, where like they would conceive of like these military mobilizations as like mobilizing this like otherwise inert mass of the people and like being directed from above to be like they're mobilized. They're not mobilizing themselves. They're being pushed around.
Yeah, I think that's
specifically the French Revolution, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely right. But like I think those concepts still echo in our heads. Like they're still kind of structuring the way we think about even engaging in politics. It's still kind of implicitly about that kind of passive mobilization, or like a passive material that is mobilized by an external, like sort of a external or like hierarchically above them sort of active agent. Whereas organizing is very different. Like it's a very different thing entirely. Like it's the people themselves organizing their active matter rather than just being passively pushed around on the huge battle tables, with the little sticks, and they push around the little wooden soldiers, to move things around.
Yeah,
very different models,
Yeah, I think that's totally right, and I think that that is the model that we're trying to facilitate, which is that kind of like bottom up, like radically democratic, the building the capacity, like again, like referring back to one of our values, which is that we like, and this is something that we think about, like when we're approaching a project, like, are we genuinely doing this? And we're quite hard on ourselves sometimes. I'm like, are we genuinely doing this, or are we kind of bullshitting ourselves that we're doing this? Like, and I think I hope that like we continually like return to is like, common knowledge seeks to empower people to change their own lives through self-organization. And there's this notion of self-organization. There's obviously like, has a place in cybernetics and so on and so forth that we want to encourage. But the key to is that in a way, we spent a long time on these. So there's this reason why they're structured in the way they are, which is like, the end of it is like, we trust that people can. And that's like, we trust that people can organize themselves, and with a little bit of help, a little bit of like, they can run with it. And I think that some of the problem with those kind of like top down and hierarchical models is they don't believe that people can run with it, and that people can change their own lives and can organize themselves. And they feel that hierarchical power is the only methodology through which things occur, when that's just simply not the case.
Because they fundamentally believe that people are inert, and that the vanguard, are the real active agents, and that if they stop pushing, like this is a kind of unfortunate kind of specter inside the activist mindset, is that if the activist stops pushing the otherwise inert people, that the motion will stop. I think that's the implicit belief at the heart of a lot of that kind of thinking that kind of is in that mobilization framework and is not really in the organization framework. And I guess like the whole history of this show has been us carping on about the same point, right? That like you have to organize something that's self-organizing and kickstart a process that will continue itself, even in the absence of any particular push from any particular activist.
I think like a good activist or a good organizer kind of also wants to organize themselves out of the equation.
Yeah,
they want to stay home because it's a lot of work, you know.
So I'll give like two brief like anecdotes about that. Like, so like that's exactly right. Like a good organizer should like be like a slight catalyst in the situation and then like step back. So like in particular, this is like in a digital context, there was a chat room in which there was a bunch of people who were tech workers. So they worked in technology in London, and basically, you know, they've been in a Slack channel essentially for like a long while. And basically, all that was needed was us. Well, in particular, like a couple of us, just to like suggest a venue to meet, and then they went off, and the rest is history. Now, like I don't want to like foreground ourselves in that particular equation, but that is like what organizers do, in the sense that they recognize the situation that's going on, and because they have a little bit more knowledge than others about what is necessary to drive this forward, they intervene with like a very small thing, and they trust that given that there's this very small intervention, it will just the system will run itself, and that's really good. And like, but as Gemma says, the thing to know as an organizer is when to step back. And there was another anecdote that someone who's a community organizer. So community organizing is a very complex tradition. There's different ways of doing it. There's kind of like a radical pedagogy kind of way of doing it. There's like Saul Alinsky, who's like, you know, very famous particular community organizer, blah, blah, blah. There's the Acorn style of community organizing, so on and so forth. But you know, this community organizer, you know, said that they would, you know, they would forget to go to meetings deliberately, because then the system would run itself. People had learned enough. And I think that's another thing is for us, like an educative function is really important. Like telling people like not what to do, but like what the capacities of particular technologies that would allow them to organize themselves more effectively. And explain that to them, and knowing when to step away, because we try as much as possible to produce technologies that allow us to completely disappear off the picture, and these things still to run.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, I just think I've had plenty of experience with the mobilization model in political parties. You know, one example that comes to mind is during the last election here in Alberta, which was a crushing defeat for the Social Democrats. We were all mobilized as canvassers, and it was all very top down. And then, you know, the day before election day, when we do the final push to get out the vote, we had a general assembly of the of the canvassers with the activist from the NDP. And the activist was up there, you know, been flown in from Toronto or something, because the NDP is a national party as well as a provincial one, and was going on and on about, okay, here's the strategy. And at one point, a comrade just stood up and she like questioned the approach he was taking, and he was kind of flabbergasted, but then he thought about it and he sort of backed down, and I was like, oh, okay, this is like the first moment I've had at this party where I felt like something positive was happening.
Oh no. Right at the end too. The first positive thing happens right at the end.
Yeah, and then we had a crushing defeat, because the message we were getting out at the doorstep was just utterly awful and futile. But, you know, it was you see those small moments of self-organizing, or the germs of self-organizing, and you're like, yeah, that's something I could get behind.
Yeah, we need to get behind more of that then. Is there anything else you'd like to talk about before we start to sign off?
Yeah, I think that particular example is one that is a very familiar territory, in the sense that political parties, as we said at the top of the show, like, we're not especially interested in organizing around electoral politics. Obviously, the elections can't be ignored, but we feel as an organization our emphasis is elsewhere. But like, that is an absolutely classic thing, which is that, yeah, you treat your your kind of canvassers as like this inert matter who are given like a rote script and just like told to get on with it, rather than being, adaptive people that like understand their particular area, but their particular the streets that they have been assigned to go around. And you ask them, within a couple of weeks of an election, to support your party, and you've never built any relationships with them. You have no relational you've not empowered, and it's a two-way relationship, right? You have not in any way empowered the people that you're particularly canvassing in any way to build their own power, build their own capacity, build their own ability to influence events. It's a purely transactional relationship. Will you vote for me or not? And then you tick them off the list and you move on to the next thing. And I think that many of the institutions that kind of exist have that model. They don't trust people enough to be able to do stuff. Fundamentally, they are suspicious of people doing stuff for themselves. And there are a variety of reasons for that, some sensible, but some of them are just basically cowardice, like lack of trust in people's basic capacities to do things. And I think that is for us at least, and I think it's very important to remember that people can do incredible things. People can do amazing things.
And also that they know their context best.
Yeah.
I think as well, it's interesting just to bring up the trust thing as well, because I feel like if we're thinking about maybe the challenges that social movements face, or any organization, it is also related to trust, in that decision making can be very difficult because organizations look for consensus. And I think it's quite interesting. So Alex mentioned it before, and I think maybe it's also, you've discussed it on the show previously, but this idea of sociocracy, which is about consent rather than consensus. And I think that's also about you're saying to the other people you're organizing with directly, or maybe the other small parts of a larger organization, is I trust you to make decisions on behalf of this organization, that's relevant to your context, and that we're not trying to look for this kind of everyone is absolutely on board with the same exact idea, or has to even be involved in the decision making.
Yeah, absolutely, right. And I think for me, it's very dark here in Edinburgh right now, and I've been feeling very doomy for the last couple of months. And it's very easy to, especially on this day is the anniversary of Labour getting absolutely fleeced in the last year's election, and it's very easy to feel very down about that, and to feel that the right are always going to be in power, and the capitalists are always going to rule. But the thing is, they also treat everyone like swine who can't possibly be clever or capable of organizing themselves. And I think this is the angle through which we could get a real genuine leg up on them, is that they can't treat people like human beings, but we can, and we should. And if we're repeating basically the same, if we're approaching people in the same way that capitalists do, and treating them as just inert fucking objects to be messed with, or to be kind of pushed around, that's definitely a losing strategy for us. But the opposite of it, I think, hopefully has real potential to, if it is built out properly, and we really go out and empower people to organize, That's the paradigm shift. That's the difference that makes the difference between bourgeois society and what we're hoping to build, right? Is that we believe that people are in fact people, and that they are intelligent organisms capable of organizing themselves. They are social beings. They have a social interest in one another that is not activated or sustained in this society. Like the whole force of capital and the force of the right pushes against all of that. But we can push in favor of it, you know? We can actually treat human beings as human beings.
Yeah. I really like that framing as well, because I think that a lot of the time activism is like framed as you're against something because horrible things are happening. And I quite like this kind of like, oh, you know, that, in terms of our vision, right, we talk about abundance. And like, I much prefer that kind of positive framing of like, we want a world where people are treated like people and that there is abundance and, you know, you can live the kind of life you want to live.
Yeah. And I think like returning to the start, which was like the kind of like slightly dull bureaucracy of forming cooperatives, like forming a co-op isn't like the total solution to those problems of alienation and, you know, the looming climate crisis and all the rest of those kind of things. But, you know, these were like, the cooperative movement is relatively old, and these were always organizations, like initially of like working class self-organization to build like solidarity and social power. And I feel that, you know, like collectively, those are some of the things, you know, in a new form, in a fresh form for like the 21st century, using different things and different ways of like operating. But they are definitely part of the puzzle. And I feel that, yeah, they provide not the total answer, of course, but like part of the answer. Cooperatives, like they're very variegated, you know, like the co-op supermarket is not the same as us or people within Kotak, but it is a different mode of social life. Mm-hmm. And it is a mode of social life. I mean, let me be absolutely like frank. I don't have a boss. Like I don't have a boss. And that is a fundamental liberation.
It's so good.
Like, I don't have anyone I need to suck up to. I don't need anyone that I need to like buy off through anyone that I need to worry about like pleasing. I want to like make sure that our collective continues and does the important work that I hope that we're able to, and that people will like want us to collaborate on. But, you know, I don't have a boss, and that is an intense liberation. I don't have to think about all this stuff, this kind of like junk that is in your head when you have a regular job. And again, like, you know, I want to be modest. Like, I'm not saying this is like the total solution, but the liberation of just not having a boss is quite incredible. And I encourage people to get on that because it's good. It's good fun.
Yeah. Especially starting from zero. Like, I mean, we're in such a bad state anyway. Like, this is going to be an improvement. No matter what the left comms say. It's like, oh, well, co-ops are just self-exploitation. It's like, yeah, whatever.
The way that I always like to think about it is like worker co-ops is like prefiguring the kind of future we want. And I think the same can be said of like grassroots trade unions and community organizations and all of that. Like all of it is building little utopias within the current system.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, just sort of picking up that point that Shane brought up earlier, you know, to the extent that the bosses do make attempts to treat us like people, it ends up falling under that sort of HR rubric. And, you know, in the oral history of Kickstarter that we covered recently, the one crucial moment that I picked up on was that as their self-organizing started to get going, they started to realize that HR was there to provide like legal protection for the bosses and to defend morale in the name of the bosses. And, you know, if we can provide that kind of prefigurative politics or self-organizing, then I think that the crumbs that we're served up frequently by the bosses are just not going to cut it. And there's political power there, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. There certainly is. Well, Gemma and Alex, this has been wonderful. Thanks very much for joining us. We very much appreciate it. And these conversations are always invigorating. It's nice to go from just looking out into the inky blackness of the sky here and thinking, wow, Jesus, there's no hope at all. And to having this conversation and thinking, wow, there is hope. It's wonderful.
No, there is hope, but it's just unevenly distributed at the moment, unfortunately.
Absolutely.
Thanks very much, folks. That was super fun.
And we're back. As I said to them, like, energizing, really energizing, especially in these kind of like very depressing couple of months. And at the end of, well, I keep saying at the end of hell year, but we all know that time is imaginary, so it's not the end of anything. Hell year will always live in our hearts. But there's something definitely invigorating about getting to talk to people about this kind of thing and feeling that maybe there is some hope. Maybe there's something here,
Yeah, I think one thing that really stood out to me was the degree to which they do self-critique around, are we actually promoting self-organization, which reminded me a lot of in Stafford Beer's memoirs about the Chilean Revolution. After he finishes the initial draft of the economic organization of society, or, gets that ball rolling, he kind of goes back and says, like, yeah, but are we actually achieving this self-organization? Are we really making the system ones autonomous? Are we making this a broad-based thing that exists outside of the workplaces? And having that moment of self-critical reflection and then going and revising the plans from there, I think is really what creates the breakthroughs. And so seeing that be a part of their practice was quite inspiring, because, yeah, I think that's really what's going to get you past just deploying an organizing tool and then saying, all right, let's go collect our paycheck from XYZ organization or, whatever NGO sponsor, or, like just that sort of like NGO bullshitting of like, oh, we've got a solution and then we just go and deploy it and it's like transformative. No, actually having that self-critical moment, like, are we actually fulfilling our mission here? I think helps to get beyond that and do something really meaningful.
Totally right. Yeah, because it's the heart and soul of cybernetics, right? Like error correcting feedback and the evaluation of performance, right? And I think it's something that comes up again and again in like beer or just in basic cybernetic stuff, but like that outcomes are completely indifferent to intentions. Like, the result of the process simply doesn't fucking care what you intended to do, and so it is necessary to check. Like, you have to actually check that the outcome lines up with your intentions. It's not enough to take it on faith.
You have to be the controller for that.
Absolutely right, and that's an active process. It's not something you can just assume will flow from the intentions or any of that kind of stuff. So yeah, error correcting feedback, even at the level of like, oh, we're people who are going to go out and help people to organize. Well, like, you have to do the error correcting feedback on that. It's like, did that actually happen? And it pays to be kind of hard on yourself, like Alex was saying,
Yeah, and to do that sort of mid-project. Yes, like don't just do the debrief after the project is over. Actually make it a self-correcting process while the project is being developed and deployed.
And a lot of folks will be familiar with that kind of concept just from Agile, right? Like Agile as it's supposed to be practiced, of like every week or 2 weeks you're kind of reformulating the plan and checking like, we set out to build these widgets. Did it actually happen? It's like, well, we ended up with a horse. It's like, did we want a horse? Not really, but well, okay, fine. That counts as failure, Yeah.
Yeah. Another thing that occurred to me during all of this is, the value of these sort of self-organizational ideas, I think, are going to become all the more clear in the coming year, because like, we have Biden coming in America and bringing this message of, I'm going to bring the technocrats back. I'm going to bring expertise to bear on this situation. But we all kind of know that based on the performance of Democratic governors in America, the performance under Biden is going to be only marginally better than it was under Trump, right? And that idea of the very serious people coming in and solving everything, I guess that might happen with a vaccination, but there's all the questions about deploying the vaccine too, right? And in those situations, I think it's going to become clear that, self-organization actually has a lot of value, and leaving it all to the very serious people, the technocrats, is a dangerous thing to do. In the case of the UK, which we've mostly been talking about here, the vaccine's getting deployed, but also no deal Brexit appears to be on the horizon, and self-organization might be useful in that kind of crisis too.
Yeah, right. You're going to be scrambling through the rubble looking for food, You're going to have to be pretty well self-organized.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the Biden thing is it's like a call for demobilization as much as ever got mobilized.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, it's very clear that they have done the mobilization, which was just soul-crushing and horrible. And now they're doing the demobilization, which is also soul-crushing and horrible. It's the one side of the equation is the only way to deal with any problem is to vote Democratic. And if you don't vote Democratic, then you are basically the scum of the earth. And then after the Democrats are elected, the only thing that you can do is not criticize the Democrats and sit at home and just let them take care of things. And if you see any problems, these problems are mere illusions that are entering into your feeble mind. That you think you see fuck ups and problems around you, but really you're just operating on a lower level of perception of reality. And if you operated at the galaxy brain level that the Democratic leadership and their partisans operate at, you'd see that this is all the subtle unfolding of a master plan that will lead us to brunch for everyone.
Yeah, can't you see that Kamala Harris is the best thing that's ever happened to any of this kind of shit? I posted a fucking thing in the Emancipation Discord the other day of anyone who's familiar with the Venture Brothers, there's that scene where it's oh, we've elected our first president, a girl Hitler, and the boys are wow, a girl president, how progressive. It's oh Jesus, this is the fucking Kamala Harris line,
Yeah.
But we can definitely see how that mobilization, demobilization oscillator is actually a part of how the system stabilizes itself. And the real way out of that is to not call for, actually Biden's saying to demobilize and we should just mobilize further, comrades, to the barricades, this kind of shit. You have to pivot out of that that binary into the imaginary numbers space. You add another axis to your thinking and move into organization rather than mobilization, as Alex was saying. And I think making that distinction is very important because I think a lot of the left and a lot of activist circles get that very badly mixed up, right? There's a mistaking mobilization and just that kind of thrust and movement, right, in a very physical sense. Mistaking that for organization is a fatal mistake. And organization is that much more fundamental thing that has to come before any of that kind of stuff can happen. It's the animal assembling itself and making its powers real in the world. And that's what you need more than mobilization, right?
Yeah, I think what occurs to me, and I may be wrong, I'm not a genius, but there's a lot of messaging that has happened prior to Biden getting elected, and now that he's been elected and is very, very slowly coming into power with his team of Silicon Valley vipers.
Vampires.
That we need to hold Biden to account. I think that any reasonable analysis would say that that's a fool's errand, because we have so much evidence that this is not actually possible under the organizational system we're in.
How are you going to fucking hold him to account?
So, like, I don't think that holding Biden to account can really be the objective. At best, it should be a side effect of the organizational strategies we pursue, because, yeah, like, they are insulated.
How are you going to challenge him? Like, what's the threat? You know, like, I mean, because I think when people say that, like, oh, we're going to hold Biden to account, I think what their neurons are actually firing is they're going to do a clapback on Twitter.
Yeah.
And that's what's going to hold him to account somehow. It's going to be this big fucking, like, circus act of, like, people just bickering on Twitter about, like, well, I'll have you know that Kamala is actually very woke, or all this kind of horseshit. That's not holding anyone to fucking account. That's not a threat. It's not a fucking movement against. It's not an opposition. It's circus, you know?
And the thing is set up in such a way that, okay, first of all, they've known since, I don't know, the 40s that there will be this backlash from the left and on the Democratic Party. And that's an entirely predictable move. Like, it is just 100% known that this sound and fury is going to be coming after the election.
Which is the kind of thing they can absorb. Like, they can digest that.
And it's basically like pushing on a wet noodle in terms of affecting the direction of the administration. So, like, we have to have a organizing strategy that is operating orthogonally to our public relationship to the Democratic Party leadership, right? You know, at the state level, you might get a little more traction there, but at the federal level, or for someone like myself in Canada, I feel like I'm only marginally more disempowered than your average American. Like,
not by much.
Not by much, really, in dealing with the presidency. Just, you know, like, don't spend your energy there, because these people don't give a shit about you. Like, you know, Biden has been the most clear about that out of anyone. Mm-hmm. Like, he's just said it, you know, like, many times on the campaign trail, like, I literally don't give a flying fuck about the left.
So like when we're contemplating strategy, right, which is the thing that the left always loves to fucking talk about and never actually really does. When we contemplate strategy, we have to contemplate, like, an economy of strategy, or an economy of motion. That, like, there is opportunity cost to spending your energy in one domain versus another. Like, it's a matter of selecting activities and selecting actions to carry out. And if you're doing this whole holding to account, pushback sort of stuff, as you said, that's something they expect. They know that's coming. It's like when you get into your car and you know your car inside out, and you know that it always kicks a little bit. You know, and like, but that's something you can compensate for. You literally have a feedback mechanism to compensate for the quirk that happens when you boot up your car. They are already compensating for that perfectly predictable pushback, in the same way that, like, I don't know, like, just a protest where you go and wave some placards around. It's like, I mean, it feels energetic and stuff, but it can be compensated for, it can be absorbed, it can be digested very easily, because they see it coming a mile off. They know exactly what's going to happen. And just like the fly fucking flying straight into a spider's web, the spider knows that's going to happen. It knows what comes next. And don't be the fly. You have to organize yourself to be a smarter organism than that fly is. You have to organize yourselves to do things that aren't predictable, that can't be integrated, that can't be compensated for by the system. That's the only way to pose a credible threat to it, is if you generate variety that it can't deal with. You have to be ungovernable. You have to be impossible to deal with. And just saying, oh, we'll hold him to account. How are you going to do that? Oh, a Facebook post. It's like, fucking congratulations, you've invented the thing that they knew was coming, and therefore it's completely ineffective.
It's just a matter of doing the same sort of work that the common knowledge folks were talking about in their self-critique. It's like, are we fulfilling our mission here? Is this being effective?
Yeah, God help the left, but like, if anyone asks that fucking question, the answer is going to be no, pretty much across the board, you know?
For sure. And that can be very depressing, but at the same time, you know, doing the same thing again, like it's extremely depressing to have lived through the Obama years and, you know, like followed those politics and like basically been radicalized by them and just saying, like, you know, as an individual, I am going to draw lessons from this experience, right? Like, I just want to see what they do and infer a pattern from that.
Mm-hmm.
And then
basic cognition.
Like, that's like just basic behavior, right? But you're surrounded by people who refuse to do that. Both the sort of like libs, the centrists, and also leftists. And it's like, just look at your surroundings. And, you know, I understand if you were just a child when Obama was in power and you didn't draw any conclusions from that, is completely understandable. But for people my age or older, I don't have any sense of sympathy for, you know, individuals who just like don't do the most basic observation of like, what do they say? What kind of actions does it lead to? What is the pattern here? Like, that's just so simple. You do that all the time with like friends and relatives. Like, why not with the political leadership of your country?
Yeah, absolutely right. It's basic stuff. It's basic cognition even. This is what a nervous system does. It integrates information and compares expectation to reality and all this sort of stuff. But for some reason, it's such a difficult pitch to, and like, you know, end up thinking I'm the one who's crazy for thinking that maybe error correcting feedback is a good way to fucking go about navigating the world. But like, I don't know. Am I the one who's wrong? You know?
Well, and the other thing is, like, you know, probably by February, the COVID pandemic is going to be the most lethal event in American history, even more than the Civil War, right? We're probably going to have around 500,000 fatalities. Biden is not going to do anything to stop that. He's basically doing the same thing Trump was doing, but just kind of like, I don't know.
But woke now, you know?
I guess it's woke now. He doesn't seem to have any kind of like serious plan for like making it possible, like providing the social resources necessary for people to do the self-isolation that would actually help with this. So, you know, just wagging your finger at people and hoping that the governors cooperate for some, you know, magical reason. So we're probably looking at like the most lethal event in American history. It's horrible. And, you know, hopefully for those of us who survive, that should provide some kind of opportunities out of the crisis. Like, everyone's been caught flat-footed because of the pandemic. I mean, it's obviously very, very bad for organizing when organizing with people is a very serious risk to your health. But going forward, you know, we need to do things like memorialize the fact that this was actually horrible, and that some people were responsible for it. Like, because I think the thing is, like, we've gone through an experience that is equivalent to wartime, but it is imagined very differently from that, right? It is imagined...
It's imagined as an act of God, almost, right? That it's like, there aren't even human agents involved at all.
There's no one, like, it's just, oh, this is just like the weather. You know, it was like a bad. It was like there was some bad weather, and like, you know, like, oh, like a hurricane blew in, and you know, even I feel like Hurricane Katrina or whatever provoked a more serious kind of like political backlash than what's happened with the pandemic, because it's not as like visually dramatic. It doesn't provide that amazing image that would hit people in their minds. So, you know, like, hopefully there's some opportunity there in terms of like memorializing these things. Like, you know, you look at something like, I don't know, for example, the number of Australians and Kiwis who were killed at Gallipoli, right? It's like a drop in the bucket compared to how many people have died in the last year and are going to die in the next number of months. But people like decades and decades and decades on are still, you know, very focused on this as like core to their national identity and to their conception of history and their place in the world, right? Like Anzac Day is still a very important thing. We've got to be able to like memorialize this in some meaningful way that people are like, oh no, actually, like this system is completely fucked. It failed us utterly and got so many people we know killed. And like, hopefully some self-organization can happen around that, because I don't want to just let that opportunity sit by the wayside so that I could sit around on Twitter and complain to Joe Biden and Kamala Harris's, you know, media relations team.
Yeah, I'm totally with you on all that, right? And I mean, even just probably the need to like insist that it ever even happened is going to be a thing. Like, I think people are going to want to try to forget that it ever fucking happened. And yeah, this moment that like just highlights the sheer like incapacity and instability of the state, or just how stable and effective it can be in an extremely narrow domain, and how just threadbare and like thin the whole thing is. And that should do a couple of things for socialists, right? Like, is highlight that like, yeah, the state isn't a kind of like impermeable, all-pervasive like Higgs field that's just everywhere at all times. It is actually a fairly anemic but very strong sort of thing, like strong in a narrow domain. And highlight the kind of instabilities it has, and like it will highlight capacities that it has, but it's also going to highlight a lot of incapacities and just like things that it can't really respond to. And also, I guess the sort of like middle way sort of thesis that like, oh, well, you know, maybe exploitation is bad and maybe this value form stuff is horrible, but maybe, you know, the state basically works. I mean, it's like, it's still got your back ultimately. And it's like, no, that illusion has to have been shattered.
Really does it?
Yeah, by now that has to have been shattered completely, right? That argument can't really hold anymore. That kind of like classic centrist sort of argument. I feel I need to correct a few things out. It's the most lethal event so far in American history. And I feel like pandemics are going to become like the weather. It's just be like, wow, Jesus, really strong pandemic today, you know? For the sake of clarity, it's worth pointing out that this episode was recorded in December of 2020, before the new variants of the coronavirus were widely acknowledged to be a problem.
Yeah. I mean, that's true. It seems that given the scale of industrial agriculture we're doing, the scale of deforestation we're doing, and the rate at which global warming is affecting the global ecosystem, you know, it's just a matter of time until another one of these rolls around. We're going to be back in the phase of history prior to the 20th century, where
just scourges just rolling across the earth constantly.
Yeah, a plague rolls around. There's no easy or immediate solution to it, and that's just going to be part of reality.
Mm-hmm. Just like, yeah, the Prussia has a scourge today.
Yes.
And, you know, that's just going to be the news, right? Yeah, wow, it's going to be... honestly, I don't know. I mean, like, are we going to see a COVID-21, maybe? What are the over-under on that, you know?
I mean, it's fairly likely. It's just a question of like, I mean, it's not fairly likely. It has already happened with that outbreak that came out of the mink farms in Denmark.
Yeah.
But we were just fortunate enough that the mutation was not sufficiently distinct in order to make it invulnerable to the vaccines we've developed. That's just luck. It's just blind luck. And, you know, we just had in Canada, I didn't even know these existed, but yeah, we actually have mink farms in Vancouver, and we had the same thing happen there. And this is like, I don't know, months. No, not months, but like a month after this happened in Denmark, it happened in Vancouver, and no one thought like, oh, wait, maybe this is a problem. Maybe we should call the minks beforehand.
Stop this shit,
like,
yeah.
Okay,
Oh, no.
sure. So it like the sites where this could happen are so many because we have just created this enormous attack surface in terms of the factory farming of mammals.
Yeah, and avoiding, like, I mean, I think it's basically inevitable that it'll, like, I mean, yeah, with the mink thing, like, total luck that it isn't a sort of extra viable kind of strain of its own. Sometimes entropy works in your favor. Most times it doesn't. I think, yeah, to hope that this won't reemerge in a different form, like, who the fuck knows, it's going to be a llama flu or something next time. In order for that to not happen, we'll all have to be rolling perfect 20s consistently forever, and we just know that isn't a thing, right? It's like the conditions are ripe for more of this kind of stuff, which all just really circles back to the system is entirely inviable. Like this is one that cannot be sustained. The usual centrist crap of like, oh well, you know, it's actually the best system we've got, and it's not that bad. Fuck that, completely and absolutely wrong. It is in the process of breaking itself apart and destroying itself, and it is absolutely imperative we organize against it.
Right, and the other thing I think that bears thinking about is like once people are vaccinated and this is under control, we will have to deal with all of the trauma that comes out of this. So we can't expect people to just like bounce back immediately and it's like, okay, to the barricades. But we can organize in that phase and like make the trauma we've experienced a part, like processing that, make that a part of the organization, but not in a way that's like just worsening our trauma, right? Like the working through it and organizing has like been a sort of positive dimension of organizing forever. And we can hopefully do more of that as this pandemic ends and create, these kind of self-organizing units that share a common experience that we can speak to.
Absolutely right. What a fucking year. It's I'm very tired at the end of all this. Well, who knows? It's not really the end of anything, but I am extremely tired.
No, it's this strange experience where we're at the end of the calendar year, but it doesn't feel like we're at the end of any kind of epoch or era. So there's a distinction between calendar time and experience time that is very acute. And it's very exhausting to be like, oh, it's the end of the year, but that doesn't actually mean anything, and we can't even do any events to mark the end of it.
No, absolutely right. We're into linear time. We've truly left the era of cyclic time, and it's full hyperbolic acceleration from here. I think like, I mean, definitely next year. Maybe this is kind of addressing the listeners. Like, I think we're after our Kentucky Route Zero series in the first quarter of the year. We're probably going to kind of go to more like a kind of monthly schedule, I guess, for a while, because I think we're going to have to just focus on like recovering and living, I guess, and also these kind of like organizing efforts. So I think we can probably expect a slower release schedule during next year, but we'll still be trickling out the Brain of the Firm sessions. So there'll be no shortage of content. It's just like, Jesus, wow, it's been a fucking hell of an experience this year. I'm looking forward to going out occasionally, maybe see a person. That'd be nice,
Yeah, I'm absolutely an introvert, which has made me perhaps better suited to this situation than others. But I'm still looking forward to going out and either seeing people in small numbers or being alone in a social context, which is also an experience that I miss very much. Even if I do not crave social contact to the same degree as many others.
I think my introversion has kind of been burned away like an ablative layer, like it's kind of like space shuttle re-entering the atmosphere and all the shielding burns off.
Yeah.
And I'm like, whew, that's just gone. I think I've like flipped over into the other mode entirely, or I'm kind of actually kind of desperate to like just get some sort of like living done at some point. I think a lot of folks are probably in the same kind of boat. But yeah, I think it's going to be important for us to not kind of do the to the barricade stuff in our organizing and start a slow ramp up, because I think we've now got this like practical experience and these like I think theoretical foundations that really do suggest that a slow boil is the way to get the job done, and maybe not like slow in the sense of like a glacial kind of reformist kind of thing, but like a slow and purposeful organizational effort that like really does lay the bricks on top of each other rather than like trying to jump to the top of the tower immediately.
Yeah, I think the very important thing to consider in comparing the situation to a wartime one, where, oftentimes at the end of a war, you will see a lot of social upheaval and like a lot of organization and mass movement, is that unlike during a war, we have not been organized en masse and had kind of these comradely experiences together that are produced by a military mobilization, right? So, like, let's not expect that we're going to have the same outcome when the pandemic ends, because we are not in the same organizational situation that you would find at the end of wartime.
Yeah, definitely.
It's just not the same thing.
We kind of need a different model. I mean, blowing our own horn here, but we need the model that we've been talking about for like reconceptualizing what any of this stuff even means, right? That like organization is not mobilization, and like it turns out that a lot of our kind of cognitive models for this sort of stuff don't really carry over into the kind of thing that we're realizing we need. And like I saw a thing on Twitter today that was like, I think as we said in the interview, today is the kind of anniversary of Labour's defeat in the previous election. I saw something scroll past me that was basically like, oh yeah, this is the anniversary. I kind of really don't mean to like pick on the person that was saying this or anything. It's just emblematic of a thing that's in the air, right? But like the thing was like, oh, it's the anniversary. It's like 1 year since this defeat, and like we've kind of pissed away the year. Haven't really done much of anything. We've all been depressed as hell. Well, next year we've really got to kick ourselves into gear and like sort our shit out. And I'm like, Jesus, like, are we even in the right framework of understanding the problem for that to make any sense as a statement? Or is it indicative perhaps that the fact that we've pissed away a year of this stuff, indicative that we're in the wrong mentality entirely, and that like just thinking about remobilizing it's just first, like it probably won't work, and also why would we expect it to work? Are we not really facing the evidence that we need to do something else and change our model of even thinking about the basics of the problem, let alone the basics of solutions?
Yeah, we need a serious assessment of what our capacities are right now, what our organizational status is, and nothing that I can read in that would suggest that we're in a position for a general offensive. It's like, well, like that might, even at the individual level, I find the idea that like, oh, I wasted this year in COVID, so I need to make up for it the next year. I mean, maybe for some people that'll work out, but I think for most people, it's probably a pretty self-destructive way to think about the upcoming year.
It's going to be a speed run of activist burnout, right?
Yeah, it's like, oh no, wait, like actually that was really, like, it's that kind of like denial relationship to trauma, right? It is like, well, like, oh, it didn't happen, it's insignificant, like, I have so much freedom now, I'm just going to kick ass. It's like, you know, when you come out of a bad breakup and you're like, I need to date all the people. And it's like...
And you hit the gym and you're fucking full of energy, And
then eventually your mind is like, wait, actually, I only have so much bandwidth for social relationships.
Absolutely.
So maybe there will be an upheaval in that sense, but I think a lot of it is going to be people actually like recovering more so than like, you know, barging into the labor offices and like kicking out Starmer and being like, all right, this is the people's party now.
We're gonna replace the slow march through the institutions with a speed run through the institutions, you know?
Yeah.
Somehow.
Yeah.
That's gonna work.
Well, I mean, we've even seen like that doesn't really work. Like when they during Occupy, I remember when they like stormed the Tory offices and just like wrecked some shit. It's like, you know, that's fun, but like like, I mean, I'm not going to say don't do that because, like, I mean, there's a certain amount of just like visceral pleasure at like the idea of like running through the Tory offices and smashing a bunch of computers. But, you know, it's like that didn't actually destroy the Tory party by any means.
I'm kind of like, now that I'm dwelling on this in my head, this like speed run concept, I mean, I think is quite applicable. That like, it's kind of like the trick over and over again with the activist mindset is that there's going to be one weird trick. There's going to be one glitch, one kind of memory overrun that'll allow us to like teleport to the castle. You know, it's like you look at like a Zelda speedrun and like, you know, the screen fades from black and it's like the little character is facing this huge castle in the distance. And instead of making deliberative progress towards the goal, what the speedrunner does is turns around, walks into a corner, jumps on top of a barrel and crouches while holding the jump button, and then they teleport to the castle. And I think that's kind of the model that we all kind of carry in our heads and hope that would work. It's like, if we can just find the one weird trick, the one glitch that would teleport us into power, we would not need to actually make the deliberative progress towards the goal. We could skip all of that shit, you know?
The thing is that, you know, particularly in very simple video games, you're dealing with stuff like memory address manipulation. But as we've like learned from the Bureau Reading Group, that level of complexity is not at all analogous to our level of complexity that we grapple with. Because like at the level that we're operating at in social life, we could spend our entire lives trying to map the memory state of the operating system we're running on and would never be any closer to doing it. Right? It's simply impossible to have that level of granular understanding of the social reality, particularly given the fact that it is a dynamic system. So it's just way, 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 way more complex than what you're going to get on an 8-bit computer. And so, yeah, that kind of like bizarro memory manipulation you see in like a Dragon Warrior speed run, where it's just like, you know, they're doing all this esoteric wizardry with the menus and then somehow end up at the end. It's just not like, don't even imagine it's possible, because it's physically not. That's just not what reality is like at this level of complexity.
The only way to deal with social reality is to navigate it in real time and organize within it.
Yeah, which is you know, you could do a speed run at that level of complexity, but it involves something that is much more tactile and dynamic than it is understanding like a fundamental abstract variable that is going to unlock the whole thing.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And unfortunately, we're stuck in that reality. We are participants in it. We have to crack on with doing it. Yeah, fun. What a fun episode.
So last we would be remiss not to say, when you are doing all this organizing coming out of the pandemic, is worth considering co-ops as an option.
Absolutely right.
We've strayed a little bit from the original source material, but I do want to bring it back to that, that, you know, co-ops are one option that are worth considering. And using the methodology we've talked about with common knowledge, I think is on many levels very useful. Like the thing you see in listening to them talk about organizing a co-op is that there is this whole landscape of organizations that exist outside of the state facilities and supplement all of those things that would be available for a capitalist firm. So we need to make use of that, like literally common knowledge and common organization in order to get to get a co-op off the ground, right? Make use of those resources, see if it makes sense for you. Don't do it all on your own. Don't do it all from scratch because the system isn't set up for you to do that. So just, find those resources out there wherever you may be, whether it's in the UK or otherwise. And just go from there.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Indeed. Thanks, listeners. It's been wonderful as always. Thanks for sticking with us this year. It's been crazy. And we'll hope you'll stick around for next year. We'll after this episode, we'll be into the Kentucky Route Zero miniseries. So if you haven't caught the game yet, maybe give it a go. Also, enjoy it vicariously. If you don't think you'll ever get around to playing it, I think you'll still get a lot from listening to us talk about it, so don't worry too much about that. And after that, then, we have some stuff planned for big readings and some big chewy stuff that we've wanted to get around to for a while. But as I said, we'll probably be taking it a bit slower this year and just figuring out how to live after a year indoors. But we really hope you stick around and hope you get organized in whatever context you're in. You can catch us on Twitter at GIUnitPod. We're on Facebook. We're on the net at generalintellectunit.net. You can find us on Patreon. If you go there, give us a couple of bucks a month, you can get into the community Discord where we're hanging out, talking with the folks all the time. And we've been doing those Brain of the Firm reading group sessions, which are really nice. They'll be coming to an end pretty soon, but maybe later in the year or next year we'll do something else. We'll probably do some Bogdanov. I think that's the one we've got planned. Plus, it helps support us and keep us alive, which is always appreciated.
Yes.
And you should definitely also check out Emancipation.network on the net. Check out our sister shows over there, Swampside Chats, Jumpsuit Utopia, From Alpha to Omega, and Mortal Science. They are all excellent. Absolutely excellent. And wow, it's that's it for the year, I think. I guess we'll see you around soon for some Kentucky. Yes.
We will be heading to the great land of Mitch McConnell to experience the true dismal landscape of late capitalism.
And then burrowing into a completely abstract hyperbolic space beneath that space.
Yes.
And a weird river beneath that one. What a fucking strange game. Absolutely bizarre.
Yeah.
But we're looking forward to plumbing the depths of the zero.
Maybe it's analogous to our experience of COVID year because time is very strange in this year. And also, the calendar year doesn't really matter on the zero. So that's kind of where we're all at.
Definitely, right? Time moves strangely on the Echo. And thanks again. We'll catch you again in a couple of weeks. We'll start up some Kentucky. It'll be great. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.